My name's Juliet Foster, and it gives me great pleasure to host today's conference and to moderate a series of engaging high-level panel discussions featuring leading government, industry and academic experts on the current geopolitical dynamics and key private wealth migration trends shaping and driving our world. Now, besides our dynamic programme in the main auditorium, our bespoke virtual conference platform also features an exhibition hall and breakaway Q&A sessions on all the leading citizenship and residence by investment programme options, as well as networking facilities so that you can connect and indeed share ideas with industry-related professionals from around the world. As we head towards 2023, relentless volatility and uncertainty continue to drive both the supply and demand side of the investment migration sector. More and more nation states are looking to leverage their sovereign equity to provide investors with the sovereign diversity they're looking for to the benefit of both. Well, we begin our 16th Global Citizenship Conference by focusing on the shifting dynamics of global migration and mobility. With me to discuss the key trends for 2023 is Dr. Parag Khanna, who's a leading global strategy advisor and a best-selling author. Dr. Khanna is the founder and managing partner of FutureMap, a data and scenario-based strategic advisory firm, and he's also a member of the Henley and Partners Board of Advisors. Dr. Khanna's latest book, Move, Humanity's New Geography, was published recently to wide acclaim. He's been named one of Esquire's 75 most influential people of the 21st century, and he holds a PhD from the London School of Economics, and he's also a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. It's called an impressive resume. Dr. Khanna, welcome. It's good to see you. Let's start first by looking at the big drivers of mobility since COVID. What are they?
It's very nice to see you again, Juliet, and thanks so much for having me join you today for this very important milestone event, you might say, because it is, we're starting to see the post-COVID contours emerge. So it's a very important moment to be analyzing where global migration is going. Well, first of all, it's really remarkable how migration managed to hold strong over the last 5 years and even the last couple of years. If you remember, just 2.5 years ago, the phrase on everyone's tongue was Great Lockdown. And people genuinely feared that mobility would end forever. Those were the stark terms in which we referred to the Great Lockdown and the impact that COVID would have. Obviously, at this point, looking back, nothing could be further from the truth. Seeing record numbers of people traveling in general, crossing borders, and a significant number of relocations. And I think that is fueled by some of the deep underlying trends that have been propelling migration and mobility internationally over the last decade and beyond. And that genuinely has to do with things like the talent shortages, the labor shortages that afflict Western economies. In fact, that has become even more pronounced during COVID. We've seen this all across the OECD world. Shortages in crucial economic sectors, whether it's healthcare, agriculture, construction, housing, education, all across the board. So here again, we see country after country seeking to engage in this war for talent, as it were, to bring in necessary numbers of migrants. This search for a better life, the economic search, and in this case also now post-COVID, the desire to be in a healthy environment, a place with an adequate medical system, for example, is now front of mind for so many people. And that simply adds to the desire for economic well-being. And now we have to add to the equation climate change. We're seeing any number of geographies that are suffering, and this is accelerated as climate change has intensified from floods, storms, droughts, heat waves, rising sea levels, and so forth. And people want to ultimately invest in their primary or secondary home, which is very often the large component of their overall net worth, and have that be in a climate resilient geography. So it's a mix of old drivers and new drivers, if you will, Juliet. But the broader point is that these are not individually segmented from each other. They're actually accumulative, and they reinforce each other in motivating people's, if you will, diversified and expanding and holistic calculations around why they wish to relocate.
It's an interesting scenario that you outlined there. And what I'd like to know from you is, how does migration and particularly the political arguments fit into this mix? Because by the token of what you're using, it seems that at some point they will become redundant given the skills shortage and the necessity to fill it and to propel countries forward.
There are events that really do accentuate this long-standing skill shortage that afflicts OECD countries. Again, we've known about it for well over 10, 15 years. In fact, if you go back 50 years, it's one of the major causes of the pull of migrants in to Western economies. There have been shortages in many sectors, particularly in construction and even medical systems, going back literally decades, given various demographic cycles. Now, with the impact of COVID, we've seen obviously a great impetus and a focus on healthcare systems. And so there's a real emphasis on having nurses, for example. And of course, we've had a high mortality and other dislocations in the labor market that have necessitated a rethink around having service workers imported from other countries in areas where they're very much needed. So again, it's a case of the skill shortages being reinforced by other trends.
You talked about the war for talent. What is going to determine the winners or the losers in this conflict? And I use that word conflict very guardedly.
Yes, I mean, in some sense, because the world population is beginning to plateau, and as we speak, this is the year 2022 when the United Nations has announced that the world population will cross 8 billion people. And we do know that fertility is decelerating rapidly. And the reason that's important as a background, as a backdrop, is that effectively, we enter a situation globally where one country's loss becomes another country's gain in a very low fertility environment. Now, Juliet, this is truly unprecedented. No one alive today, not even our parents or grandparents, lived at a time when the world population was not steeply ascending. In fact, it quadrupled from 2 billion people in 1920 to the 8 billion people that we have today. So it's truly unprecedented for us to be entering a world in which the world population is actually plateauing. And in that sense, the war for talent or conflict over talent is not necessarily a military confrontation, but it certainly is a zero-sum game. And in that regard, I view countries as falling into two categories: those that realize this situation and anticipate it and are retooling their immigration policies accordingly, and those that have not yet realized it and not yet acted upon it. And there you see a clear divergence between the behavior of a country like Canada or a country like Britain, actually, interestingly enough, which has, post-Brexit really turned around in many ways and is recalibrated immigration policy to make it more lenient and expedient for people with certain degrees or certain skill sets to not just seasonally, but even permanently relocate to Britain or to move through the various categories of immigration, whether it's students or workers, professionals, and so forth. So it's become less onerous than it was before. Canada, again, really does set the standard. The United States has returned to high migration this year. Both Japan and Australia, being relatively guarded islands, really suffered during COVID from the lack of inbound immigration and have now really tried to turn around very quickly and draw in talent. And of course, Germany, more involuntarily, has for the last 7 or 8 years been a major destination for refugee populations, first coming out of Syria and the Middle East more broadly, and now, of course, Ukraine. And so it has actually increased the size of its labor force and remains in some ways, although its industrial sector is hurting under the weight of sanctions related to exports to Russia, tensions with China, and so on. It is still the motor of Europe, and some of that is attributable to the fact that its workforce has grown as it has absorbed these populations.
This war for talent, though, what is it going to do for the human skill set? Does it mean, for example, that STEM subjects are going to be more coveted perhaps than others? And what does that mean for those whose skills do not lie within the scientific base?
It is true that among the crucial areas of skill shortages in Western OECD economies is technology, IT workers, knowledge workers, and therefore privileging those that have those degrees, particularly from Asian countries, in fact, such as India and across Southeast Asia, has become a premium. And if you see the German Opportunity Card program, which is really an evolution of the blue card system across the EU, they're clearly targeting those highly skilled, if you will, graduates from STEM subjects and finding them, luring them from across Asia. And that's something that you can see across the German IT sector. But again, it's something that Canada has been doing for quite a while, and something that the United States has been doing by default for a long time. So this practice is now broadening. What it means, though, of course, is that given the wage premium of those sectors, you're starting to see, of course, educational systems retool themselves and to focus on those subjects. To change the medium of instruction into English is another way in which one is seeing the proliferation of the attractiveness and appeal of these subjects. And of course, again, the immigration schemes prioritizing those. So you basically have a virtuous circle underway. Now, I think there will still be those shortages, and it's going to be corrected in one of several ways. The first is, of course, just expanded migration in those areas. The second is a greater degree of outsourcing, because, of course, one of the consequences of COVID has been the rise of global remote work. So it means that if you cannot bring the IT talent to you, simply hire that IT talent wherever it may be in the world. So India has benefited from that as well, as have other countries that have been attracting the so-called digital nomads. And this is where a number of countries, of course, overlap to some degree with citizenship by investment or residency by investment programs, depending on the economic tier or socioeconomic tier represented by those workers. But irrespective of the category or scheme that is being offered, so many countries, Juliet, as you and I know, well over 100, have initiated some form of program or the other that are looking for those remote workers.
And it's a fair point that you raise, but it does appear that some countries are more further ahead, perhaps, than others for whatever reason. So are we looking in the future at a two-track world?
Well, I believe that policies are changing very quickly as countries observe each other, and I'm a student of those learning effects across countries, and I believe that it happens much more quickly than we realize. For example, when a European country or any country is sort of studying how it can attract talent, how it can attract investors, it simply needs to scan outward at the world and look at those best practices, whether it's highly skilled migrant programs, nomad visa programs, or residency by investment programs. And there's a broad menu for them to choose from that suit their political context and the conditions and terms that they are willing to offer to the marketplace. So I think that whereas right now we can see a two-track system where there are those who clearly get it and are moving forward very aggressively and winning, that doesn't mean that they'll always have the upper hand. So I think we have to, on the one hand, applaud and appreciate actually that these learning effects are underway. I personally support wholeheartedly that governments learn from each other and copy the best practices rather than the worst practices, for example. That's fairly obvious. But the other is that we're all subject to this complexity. Every state in the world is a price taker in a complex global system. Now, if you look tragically at the case of Ukraine, it was a fact that over the last 5-7 years, Ukraine was a destination for a lot of IT investment, back offices, remote work, and so on. But now, of course, people have had to flee in a large refugee wave given the conflict with Russia, the invasion of Russia. So this means that not every place is necessarily secure, and that optionality of mobility is crucial from the standpoint of the individual who's canvassing the world and thinking where they want to be. But it's also that countries, again, may benefit temporarily or in the long term from others no longer being the most suitable or desirable environment. And so what I believe is that we'll always have this complex competition among countries. And as they learn, those that are in the first tier, second tier, third tier, they'll continuously shift positions.
Dr. Parag, Khanna, we'll leave it there, but thank you so much for your time and, of course, your valuable contribution to our opening session of Henley and Partners' 16th Annual Global Citizenship Conference. And a big thank you as well to our online audience. Please make sure that you stay with us for the rest of the day because we have a packed programme for you to enjoy. Don't forget, of course, to visit our exhibition hall, chat to our client advisors, and, of course, attend the breakaway Q&A sessions on all the leading citizenship and residence by investment programme options that are available. And of course, in between all of that, you can hang out in our networking lounge where you can connect and share ideas with industry-related professionals from around the world. So please enjoy. you.